Hello, my name is Xander. Welcome back to the Python Beginners course. This is the fourth module of 10 in the Python Beginners course. If you have missed any of the previous tutorials and you want to go and look at those first, there is a link in the video description and you can head over to those modules. I only mention that because I'm assuming you have got Python installed and you have got Visual Studio Code or a text editor, and you know how to create a simple Python file so we can start practicing and developing our knowledge of strings. So far in this course, we've been utilizing strings and assigning strings to variables. So for example, here we had hello world. So we created this string here, we stored it in a variable, and we have been going ahead and printing strings out. So that's pretty much what we've been doing with strings so far. We have gone over some of the other aspects. So for example, utilizing a new line. So this would generate a new line. So let's just go ahead and execute this. There we go. And we know that we need to kind of buddy that up there. So then the white space doesn't appear after the N here. So we have hello world. In Python strings, the backslash is a special character, also called an escape character. So this is used to help us represent different actions. So in this case, for example, you can see that we've used a backslash and then an N, which is now telling Python to create a new line. And that's what's been outputting a new line after the word hello. So this isn't just limited to creating a new line. There's a number of different key aspects which you might want to remember or just make a note of if you're utilizing strings or want to manipulate your string further. So for example, if I wanted to create, for example, some single quotes inside of here, let's just give that a go. You can see that's working okay. But what if I wanted to actually output double quotes? For example, you can see that I'm going to get a syntax error, but I actually wanted to print out the string, which also included these double quotes. And of course, everything here in a string is wrapped around the double quotes. So what's happening here is that we're kind of ending this here, and we're causing a problem. You can see where the problem occurs right here. So how can we represent these in a string? Well, this is why we got the escape character. So let's use the escape character before the double quotes on both sides there, and we give that a go. And you can see now we can represent those double quotes there by first of all escaping. So we're basically just telling Python that the next character is going to be utilized as part of the string. So what about if I just wanted to use a slash, for example? So that looks like it's going to work okay. What about a double slash? Okay, so now potentially we've got a problem. How do we represent a double slash? So let's just add another slash there, and there we go. So we need to escape before we can have a double slash. So you can see how some of these are now going to be utilized. So we know about the /n. So this will represent or create a new line. Okay. And now we can also have, for example, a tab. So we can simulate a tab. Let's have a look at that. So you can see that we have got a tab's width now between hello and world. And in addition to that, what we also can have, for example, is let's put a B, sorry, \b, and that's going to provide a go back a space basically. So here you can see now there's no space between hello and world. So \b, that will then return or go back a space. So you can start to see how important this backslash will be, or this escape character, to help us utilize other characters that we want to actually use within the string or to perform additional actions. So let's just finish this off with some examples here. So we've got different cases of utilizing escape characters, and there we go. It's worth noting that although we can create new lines utilizing \n, we do have in Python the ability to create a multi-line system, or a multi-line string. So here, for example, a multi-line string, we utilize the triple quotes, and then we can just specify by just displaying the string how we want by utilizing the enter here on the keyboard. So our string should be formatted in this format, utilizing these 4 lines. So we give that a go, and there we go. So I do hope at this point you're feeling comfortable assigning strings to variables and printing strings. So it's at this point we need to understand a little bit more detail about Python strings. So a Python string is an array of bytes representing Unicode characters. Now there's a lot to take in there if you don't know what an array is, if you don't know what a byte is, if you don't know what Unicode characters are. So let's just take you through some of the basics here. So speaking very loosely here, let's just imagine we've created this variable and we've stored this string hello. Now behind the scenes, we're saying that this is an array of bytes representing Unicode characters. So an array then. So array means multiple items. So here, this string is being stored as hello, but we can access it and think of it as being saved as individual letters. So although it will output hello, we can refer to this or think of this being saved as individual letters. And that's important because with these individual letters, whether it be hello or whatever word or whatever string you're saving, they can then be assigned to, say, numbers or positions. So what we have now is starting from 0, any string. So this might be a whole sentence. So I'm just using a word as for an example. But every letter here would have a position in the array. So this is an array of letters that make up this word. And we can assign these numbers here or access these letters, via these numbers here. So where they're actually positioned in the array. So this is the first letter in the array. So it's 0, E is 1, L is 2, L is 3, and 0 here, is 4. So that's important to understand when we start to manipulate a string. So the important thing here to think about is if we have this type of system, what it means is that I could call or request just 2 letters. So I could say to Python, I only want to get the second 2 letters in this string. Or maybe I want to manipulate this string and add an extra character here, for example. So I could potentially do that. And how I would do that is I need to understand what position I want to actually put that new character, or should I say Unicode character. So let's go to the code and have a look at some of the tools that we have to kind of manipulate our string further. And that's when we start to see this idea of this array and this positioning kind of format that I presented to you. So let's go ahead and just create a new variable here. So let's just use the example hello. Now I did have it in capitals before for no particular reason in the example in the presentation there. So we've got this string now, hello. So let's just print out something here. So what we're going to do is we're going to print X. So that's just going to print hello. But now what I can do using this array, I keep coming back to this array of bytes, I can now choose the position based upon the position that I choose. I can now just output particular or singular letters. So, or singular or multiple letters. So let's just go ahead and let's just use these brackets here and select 1. So try and guess what is now going to be outputted. So one would suggest that I'm only requesting this letter here, which is E, which is in position 1. So let's go ahead and run that. And you can see now how that I've now selected that particular character, 1, and I'm now outputting E. So I can access single letters if I wish to, but I could also slice this word and access multiple letters. So for example, by utilizing colon, it allows me now to select a range of letters. So let's go for 0. So 0, remember, is representing the first character here. And then I'll use the colon, and this time I'm going to choose 1. So what I'm essentially saying here is I want to select from 0 to 1. Now let's just look at this behavior because it's very particular. Notice that it only produces 1 letter. So you may have thought that I was selecting 0 and 1, but I'm selecting a range in this case between from 0 up until 1. So I'm not actually selecting 1. This is important to understand. I'm not actually selecting this character here, 1. I'm selecting everything up to that point. So if I select 2, you can imagine now 0, 1, and that takes us up to 2, but then I stop. So let's go ahead now, and you can see that happening. So going back here, I've selected a range, I've sliced this string here from 0 all the way up to 1, and I'm not selecting 2. I'm saying stop when you get to 2. Now, in actual fact, I don't need to specify the first character if I want to start from the beginning. I can just leave it blank, and you can see that the outcome is the same. Now, so there's 2 options there. I can slice in between, so I can, for example, 1 to 2. So we're going to start at 1 and stop at 2. So this is going to produce just E, for example. And you can see, just by playing around with these numbers, you can select different parts of the string. Now, similar to like we've done before that we started at the start of the string, we can also do the opposite and slice the end. So let's leave a character from the end here and then do that. And you can see what we've done now is we're saying, well, don't print 1 or up to 1. So that's just 0. Remember, that's up to 1, but print the rest. So ELO. So there we're able to slice in a completely different way. So let's just do 2. So you can imagine what's going to happen now, 0 and 1. So all it's going to be now outputted is LLO. There we go. So it's worth just going through some other examples just to practice this, because in addition to this, we can also use minus. So for example, can you guess what's going to happen here? So we've got -2. There we go. So now it's just producing LO. So here, how we could look at this is that working from the right-hand side, 0, 1, and then stop when it gets to 2. So by using minus here, it's essentially just grabbing these 2. And of course, if we just add, for example, 4, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's going to select everything at this point up until 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3. Remember, this is 4. So it just selects ELLO. So let's do the same thing again at the end here. So let's just select -2. So I wonder if you can guess the behavior of this now. So now we have HEL. So let's think about what's happening here. So 0, 1, 2. So it's stopping there. Okay, so obviously not. So 0, 1, 2. So it looks like by utilizing minus here on the end, it's slicing from the start up into the middle here. Essentially what's happening here is just performing the opposite operation. So 2, and you can see the output here is just HE. So that's 0, 1, 2, and it's then producing just HE. So if it's minus, it's just going to happen the other way. So this time 0, 1, 2, and the rest then is removed or not shown. So that's the principles there of slicing and selecting data, or selecting strings, and the principles of how strings are being stored and can be selected through this array of bytes representing Unicode characters, these characters. So because we understand the fact that we've now got an array of characters and they are essentially have a positional number, it does also mean we have other tools at our disposal. So for example, we can count. So let's find the length of X. There we go, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 5 characters. So we can find the length of a string, for example. So it's well worth practicing some of these different skills. We're trying to include it in some of the examples or challenges at the end here. And this is something that might not sink in straight away. And it might be something that you just need to revisit now and then just to remind yourself. Now, the repository on GitHub for this course, there's an example for everything that I've shown you. So by all means, copy that and just utilize it for your own means and for your own preparation or notes whenever you're developing. Don't worry too much. There is just so much to learn. If you forget things, just have these notes readily and available so that you can easily access them when you need to. And of course, over time, and here I'm talking about years here, over time, this will just be implanted into memory and this will just become second nature. So something that we've already covered on this series, which I just wanted to remind you of, is the ability to manipulate the strings visually by, for example, here capitalizing upper, lower, and title. So just having a look at some of these behaviors that you may want to utilize in your code. So capitalization here, you can see that the first letter is going to be capitalized. That can be really handy if you've got user input and they, of course, forget to use capitals. So that can be really useful. Uppercase, so all uppercase, and lowercase, that can also be useful. Again, when you've got user input and they accidentally add in different capitals where potentially you don't want to, and you want to store that into a database, it just means that your data is going to be really consistent. And then, of course, you can go ahead and utilize some of these other tools and then format that data how you want it to look like. And then you've got title, which will just then capitalize all the first letters of all the words. Okay, so back to some formatting or some manipulation here. So what might happen in text is that there are some kind of white spaces that have been left behind, maybe as data has moved around or come from databases, etc. There may be some white spaces left at the start and the end. So we do have tools for this to kind of just strip this. So for example, we've got text dot and then the strip command here or function. So here we can just select what it is we want to strip. So I'm going to strip some white spaces. Let's give that a go. And you can see that the white space has been stripped. If I were just to print that without the strip, you'll see that there'll be a space at the start. You won't see the end space, of course, but there is a space at the end there. So a common tool that you might want to utilize is finding items in a string, for example. So we have two ways of doing this. So let's have a look at this. So imagine we wanted to scan a piece of text, a string, for particular words, for example. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to convert that to X here. Right, so we've got our string, so Y. So now what we can do is just find. So we utilize the find method here, and let's just find a word, hello, for example, and let's just print. So we find something, and now we want some sort of action because we want to determine whether we found something or not. So let's have a look at the behavior of find. This is important. So notice here that when I print out find, or the results from find, is I've returned 0. Okay. So let's just change this to something that isn't in the string. So we want to find this in the string, which obviously doesn't exist. Let's see what the outcome is. It's -1. So let's just change the word here to am. So now we're going to look for this string for the word am. Now there's only one instance here. Yep. Okay. And notice it now says 6. So, okay, let's just go into old and do that one. There's 18. So you might be able to guess now, based upon this system here that I introduced earlier, what is happening. So the first time we looked for the word hello, and that provided us, always scrolls too far. That then returns 0. So you can see where this word starts here in this array at position 0. So here, for example, we then move to am, and then we return 6. So position 6, that's when the word started. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is a character, space is a character, so 5, and then this is obviously 6 here. So it found the match, and then it produces where that match exists in our array of our string. So that's very interesting. And notice that when it can't find a match, it returns -1. So that might be important because we might want to then utilize that in a certain way that's going to be helpful for us to add into our system flow. So we could turn this here, for example, into an if statement, couldn't we? So if y is more than or equal to 0, for example, then we know that we have a match. So let's just print match, for example. So we know that else, we could run an else if we wanted to at this point, because we know at this point, if y doesn't return, if if we find something and it returns a -1, we know that we haven't found a match. So basically any number above 0, we know that we found a match. Anything else, we know that we haven't found a match. So we can just go ahead and print no match, for example. So let's just give this a go. So y, yep, okay. So a match was found. So at the moment we're looking for the word old. So a match was found. Let's just go for hello. So that should return match. And then of course, let's do something that doesn't exist in this string. And there we go, no match was found. The limitation of utilizing find is only going to match strings. So a lot of the time you'll be utilizing different types of Python data structures. A popular structure being, for example, a list. So we will talk in more detail in part 7 of this course about lists and other types of Python data structures, but let's just quickly introduce you to this. So far, we've been creating these variables with singular data, shall we say. So sometimes we want to store multiple data within a variable in a structured way. So we could create, for example, a list. So let's go ahead and do that. So here what we need to use are our square brackets here, and then we can then define items in this list. So let's just wrap these up. You can see the format here. We have double quotes, we have a string here, and then the comma, and then, for example, another piece of data, which is B. So this can be any text, of course. So let's just have A, B, and C. So what I'm doing now is I've created some structured data, a list here of letters, for example. So it might be that I want to find something within my list. So imagine these, well, let's just go for a simple example: apples, pears, and banana. Okay, so we want to find whether a pair exists within our list, for example. So let's just use find again. So let's just manipulate this. So Z find, and then we want to find, in this case, apple. So we're going to print then the Y. See if that works. And you can see here that we can't utilize find. So what we have is another tool, index. So let's just replace find with index. It's going to work in a very similar way to find. And let's just give this a go. And you can see here what's being produced is a number 0. So this 0 represents the position of the item in the list. So this being 0, this being 1, and then this being 2. Similar to what this type of setup that we've seen here in this array of bytes representing Unicode characters. So it has positions. So if I were, for example, to select pair, you will now see, we may be able to guess that this is 0, this must be 1. So it's now going to tell me the position of this item, which is 1. So we clearly find a match. So the question is now, what is the behavior when we don't find a match? So let's just try and find something that doesn't exist in our list, and we get a value error. So that's a big difference from utilizing what we used before, the find. Find will not provide a value error, whereas the index does. So potentially we need to deal with this slightly differently when we're utilizing this within our program. So I wanted to introduce you to try except. So the try block lets you test a block of code for errors, and then the except block lets you handle the error. Now this is something that I won't be covering on this course, but on the following course from this, we'll go through this in a little bit more detail. But try except, like I said, the try block is going to let us test the block of code for errors. So what we're going to do now is going to create a try except so that we can test for errors. So we know there's an error here. So let's just remove this. And now we can use try. Okay, so let's try something. So what we want to try and find something within our list. Okay, so we know that if this doesn't appear in the list, it's going to cause or it's going to produce a value error. So what we need to do now is if that happens, if we use a try and except, it will capture that. And now we can actually return something maybe useful to capture that error. So let's use accept. And we know it's going to be, we're going to try and capture a value error. So if we do receive a value error, so we're just matching this to the error that we're kind of expecting here. And we're going to do something else. So let's just go ahead and print there is an error. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. We know that there's going to be an error because this doesn't exist. We're then going to capture that error and then we're going to do something. In this case, just print out. So let's give that a go. And there we go. So now we're printing out there is an error. So to compare index and find, we know that find will only work on strings and index allows us to look for data within other types of Python data structures. In addition to that, we've seen that if we utilize the find, then it's returning a value, -6 if it can't find or can't match, or else a number that represents where that part of the string appears, or that data that you're searching for appears in the string. So we can see with the index that we're going to return a value error here, and we can go ahead and capture that and then perform some other actions potentially within our application. So it's worth noting that both index and find, they work very similar in that we can also specify where to look for this data. So you can see here in our function, we can extend and add additional parameters here to identify where exactly we want to look in our string. So in this case, we're going to start from character 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to start here. So we're going to then end on 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. So let's see if we can find that. And you can see that it does actually then find on character 6 what we're looking for. Now we could change this, for example, to 10. Now obviously what we're doing now is limiting the range. Essentially we're just slicing here where we want to look for the data. You can now see I return -1 because it can't find it, because we've not given it enough information or data to look at in order to actually match this whole string here to our existing string. So we can do exactly the same thing with index, utilize the same parameters to define exactly where we want to look for data. More often or not, we're not just looking for individual words. We may be looking to count the amount of times that particular word appears. If it's a list, of course, that could be quite interesting because we could count how many times a particular word or a particular age, for example, appears in a list. And that can be really useful to generate different statistics. But let's have a look at how we can potentially perform this type of operation. So we're going to use x and then count function. So we can now count and return the number of non-overlapping occurrences. Right, so let's have a look at this list. So we've got the word apple twice. Now this doesn't have an S here, but we can still match this. So let's just go ahead and type in apple. What we've got here, we've got two instances, apple here and apple here. So we should return, if we print y, we should be returning 2. There we go. So now we know how to find data within strings. Often we want to then perform a different operation. So let's just go over a basic function here called replace. So imagine we wanted to replace the word apple and we now want to replace it with something else. So first of all, we define what we want to replace, in this case, apple. And then we can just identify like we have here. So replace old, new count. So we're going to define the old and the new parameter here. So we're going to change this to, for example, pair. So let's go ahead now and print. We don't need to. Okay, so we're going to save that in y. Let's print y. Yep. Okay, and there we go. So we can now see that we've changed how many, of course, how many apples. We can now see that we've changed this into pairs. So hopefully now you've got a grasp of what's happening here in terms of how the data is being stored, the string is being stored and represented so that we can perform these type of operations on strings. we have moved through some of the fundamental functions that we can perform on a string. Of course, there are many more, and it's worth having a look and consulting the Python documentation so that you can expand your knowledge. But let's just start off with what I've shown you. Go ahead and think about different ways and practice utilizing these functions so that you become a little bit more familiar utilizing them in your program. So just before we move on to the code challenges, I just wanted to go through 3 different methods you might see in code, or you might utilize ways to actually present strings within a print function. So you might see in legacy code, or where older versions of Python have been utilized to develop an application, you might see the modulus within a print function, for example, to help format the string or interpolate variables into a formatting string. So we have spoken before about actually presenting or utilizing functions within a print to develop some sort of output. So for example, hello, my name is, and I have shown you in previous tutorials using the F format, which is very much the latest way of formatting a string here in your print statement or your print function. So we use the F here, and then we utilize the curly braces here, and from there we can then define the data from our variable we want to then output, and that outputs, in this case, hello, my name is Xander. So there are some older formats of performing these operations. That's where I'm going to here. So we can use the modulus here. So let's just go through this example. We're going to format this into a kind of an older method of performing the same action here. So hello, my name is, and then let's go for the modulus. And here we need to define what type of data we wanted to actually output. So S being a string. So you can go ahead and read about this. It's not important. I just wanted to show you, in case you were to come across this in any code, you know roughly what's happening here, and potentially you could format it. So this letter here is referring to a data type, a string. So what I want to do is I want to change that this point here into the string that I defined. So after this, we then add the modulus again, and then we can just define, for example, the data we want to add into that. So let's just use X here, the variable, and there we go. So you can see that's absolutely performing exactly the same function, just in a different way. And what's happened over time is this type of format has been considered not very efficient, or maybe it's very complicated in certain situations. And so Python has changed and adapted to help overcome some of these problems to what we see today, which is the F format, which I showed you first. And that was the format we've also been utilizing in previous sections of this course. So this works with multiple data. So for example, if I wanted to print this out twice, let's put 2 of those. You can see that there's not enough arguments. So for every item here, we need an argument. So let's just wrap this up in brackets, and let's just define 2 items. So let's just go for Y. And there we go. So Xander 18. So you can kind of see what's happening here. We've defined 2 parameters here. So we need to define the data point in order to insert into our string. Okay. So if I turn this into an integer, there's no casting needed here. So you can see that it is then converting for us, and it's then presenting it within a string. So this evolved over time, and eventually we moved on to, for example, F format. So here, for example, let's just perform the same action again, but by utilizing F format. So we're going to, in this case, utilize the curly braces as kind of placeholders here where we want the data to appear. So there's no having to specify the data type. And this time we are going to use dot format. And again, we just define the data we want to use. So we'll go ahead and use that, and you can see it's performing exactly the same operation. Now, it was possible with this format to, for example, specify or define keyword arguments. So for example, here, this might be, we might call this name and call this age. And then what we might do here is we take our data and we say name equals, and then age equals. So we're just defining keyword arguments here. So we're using these keywords to find the data, and then using these keywords to then place where we need to. And this can be a little bit more efficient. For example, if you didn't want to use, because we've seen here that this is in order, so X is going to go here, Y is going to be placed here. So what happens if we want Y over here, for example, as well? So utilizing this type of system, it provided a little bit more flexibility in that respect. So let's give that a go. And you can see it's outputting exactly the same. So that leads us to F format. That's what we've been utilizing throughout this course so far. So let's just go ahead and format this into what we've been utilizing. So we don't need any of this anymore. And then we saw that here we just need to specify the data source. So this is going to be X and this is going to be Y. And that should print out the same. There we go. So now let's put this new knowledge and previous knowledge from the other modules into action to complete some code challenges. There are currently 6 challenges that I'm going to go through here in this video. Now, if you go over to the GitHub repository, I will continue adding code challenges over time. So you may find more than 6 available in the GitHub repository code. For the first challenge, we need 3 inputs. So we need to ask the user for their username and to enter their password twice. So let's make the assumption they're making an account, for example. They need a username and a password, and those passwords obviously need to match. That's why we're asking them to input twice. So we now need to check those passwords to make sure they're at least 8 characters in length. If they're not, we're going to ask the user to re-enter the username and password. If the passwords are 8 characters or more, then that's great. We will then just tell the user an account has been made, for example. So I'll go through the solution, but by all means pause here and try and see if you can do this yourself. Right, so we need 3 inputs. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to call this X, Y, and Z, the variables. You may want to name them to username, password 1 and password 2, of course. So enter your name. And then Y is going to be another input. Enter your password. Oh. Okay. And then Z equals input again. So this time we're going to say enter your password again. There we go. Right, so now we have that. We now need to check to make sure that both passwords entered are more or equal to 8 characters in length. I'm going to extend this slightly, and first of all I'm going to check to make sure that the user has typed in 2 passwords and they're both the same. So using an if statement here, so if Y is equal to Z, then we know we're heading in the right direction. So let's just put a placement here. Now if Y and Z don't equal, so if they've typed in the password twice but they don't match, then straight away I'm going to now provide him a message. So if that, else we're going to print passwords do not match. Please try again. There we go. Okay, so that solves that little problem there if they don't actually type in the same password twice. Now, assuming that they have typed in the password twice, now I want to check, so if this condition is true, if they do match, I now want to do something else. So now I'm going to check to make sure, I'm going to use a nested if here. So I'm going to check if, first I'm going to measure the length, of each password. So let's do that first. So len, if you remember, this is going to return the length of the user's input, the first password. Now this needs to be more than 8. So let's do if it's less than 8, or the length of the Z is less than 8. So assuming that one of these conditions returns true, we're now going to run a piece of code down here. So if one of these passwords they've entered, or both of them, are less than 8 characters, we're now going to print and ask the user to, well, re-enter. So let's go ahead and do this. So passwords we'll tell them that the password must be at least 8 characters long. Okay, so that checks to make sure that the both passwords have more than or equal to 8 characters in length. So now we can use the else. So if both of these return false, then we'll then run this else statement here. So print thank you, an account has been made. Right, so let's go ahead now and give this a go. So enter your name, just A, and enter your password. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 characters. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So everything matches up. So by this logic here, length is less than 8, it's false. Length Z is less than 8, false. So we're going to run this print statement right here. That's the intention. And there we go. Thank you. An account has been made. Right, so let's just try this again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, give that a go. It says now password must be at least 8 characters long. So here, the password was captured here because the length was less. So this was true. So therefore, the print statement here was printed to the terminal. Right, so let's just run the third one. So we're going to have the passwords don't match. So this now will be false. So it should print out the else. There we go. Passwords do not match. Please try again. So if you did have a go at this, your answer might be slightly different. We could run this in multiple ways because here, for example, we could just check the other way. So for example, if the length was equal to, or sorry, more than or equal to 8, so we could just run this the other way. Then this would return true if they have typed in their username and password, and it is 8 characters long. Both of them are 8 characters long. So we would just basically just need to swap this around, for example, here, and that would work just the same. So this would be now true, and this would now be the false option, for example. So again, you may have a different option here. Now, I have added this element to this solution here. So you may not have this element here. So your answer might be something simple like that. Right then, let's head over to Code Challenge 2. Sometimes when a user logs in, they are provided part of a telephone number, for example. So maybe you've tried to reset your account. Now, sometimes you would have to type in an email, then the system would tell you that they want to send you a text message with a key or a number of some sort, identification number, which you can then utilize to sign in again, for example. So normally you don't see the whole telephone number, you only see the last 3 digits, for example. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take an input from a user, that's going to be their telephone number. And then what we're going to do is then we're going to display that telephone number back to them, but we're only going to show the last 3 numbers of that telephone number. The rest of the characters, we're going to use the asterisks. So imagine a telephone number was 8 characters in length. The user types that in. We're then going to print out the last 3 numbers, but replace the rest of the numbers with an asterisk. That's the task. So this is going to need some thinking potentially. It's not necessarily an easy task, but let's just do the easy bit here. We're just going to take an input from the user. So enter your phone number. We know that's going to be the case. Right, so now potentially, well, there's many ways we can solve this problem. So let's just go through this based upon what we've learned so far. So we know that we can slice, for example, strings. We also know that we can, for example, count strings. So first of all, let's just imagine that telephone numbers around the world, they have a different length. So we can't rely on the fact that the telephone number is always going to be the same length. So let's create a new variable called y, and let's just go ahead and use length again, and let's just calculate the length. So for example, if someone types in a telephone number that's 8 characters in length, now what's going to be stored here in y is the length of that telephone number, say 8 numbers, for example. So we can, by all means, go ahead as you develop your application, use print to see what is being returned. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can see that there's 8 numbers here, and I'm returning 8. I'm returning the length of that string, which is 8. So let's now try and slice our telephone number. Let's just do this in some logical steps here. So we're going to take X, and now we want to slice this. So let's use the brackets. And now we need to define and only return the last 3 numbers. Right, so here you may have forgotten, because there's a few options here, isn't there? So you've got the number colon, you've got the colon number, and we've also got minus numbers at the start and at the end. So there's a few options here, and we just need to try and work out what option to utilize. Now, you may have remembered some of these different options. Slice from the start, of course, slice end. So let's give this a go. Let's utilize 3 here, see what happens here. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. So that seems to slice it from the start. So it removes the first 3 digits in this array here. So 0, remember it starts from 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 2. So remember it stops at 3. So when it reaches 3, so 0, 1, 2. So that is numbers 1, 2, and 3. So this 3 is, in this case, removing the first 3 characters, and then it's just then showing the rest of the characters. Now, if you remember, if we use the 3 over here, let's give this a go. You can see it's pretty much doing the complete opposite. It's now showing us the first 3 numbers. Right, so here we just need to do the opposite. So here what's happening, it's showing us the last set of numbers, but removing the first 3. So if we just turn that around by using minus, let's give that a go. We now have a solution. So remember it's 0, 1, 2. 0, 1, 2, and then the third item isn't shown, so it stops at the third character in this array here. So there we go. Hopefully that makes sense. So what we have now here in the Z variable is the last 3 digits. Right, so we now know the length, and we know that we want to remove 3 from the end. So let's just do something simple here. Let's take the length of the number, say 8 characters. Let's take away 3 from it. So that gives us a number now of the total length minus the 3 that we're actually going to show the user. Right, so we now have that number. Right, so let's just print out an asterisk for the amount of numbers that need to be not shown. Now, we know the amount of numbers that need to be not shown because we've got it here. We've got the length of the original number, and we've taken 3 away from it. So if you remember from the second tutorial, I think, we utilized this type of format here, where we times a string a number of times, and it will display that a number of times. So here we're essentially taking this and we're timesing it by y. So what's happening here is that if I, for example, enter 8 numbers, take away 8, that leaves me with 5 numbers. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing asterisk times 5, 1 times 5. So it's going to show me 5 asterisks here. Right, so what I need to do now is just concatenate that with Z, which is the last 3 numbers of our phone number. So let's just give that a go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there we go. So maybe you come up with a different solution. So I'd be interested to know exactly what your solution is. So please paste it into the comments. It's always interesting to know your solution, how you resolved this problem. But let's now move on to the third challenge. Right, so ask the user to type in their first name and surname. Print the initials. So all we're going to do here is take the first letter from their first name and their surname, and we're going to print their initials. Now, normally when we utilize initials, they're capitalized. So let's also print their initials in capital letters. Right, so we're going to need 2 inputs. So again, I'm using these X, Y, Z variables it's always better to name your variables appropriately. So by all means, go ahead and do that. So let's input, enter your first name. There we go. And then the Y input, enter your surname. There we go. So that's our first name and surname entered. So we want to collect the first letter from each of their names. Right, so let's do, we're just going to override these variables, right? So at the moment we're storing the whole name, but we're just going to use X again. We're going to override it and just save their initial, their first letter. So let's take X, the current information that's stored in X, which is whatever the user's typed in, the name. And then let's go ahead and just slice this. So it just returns the first letter. So if you're not sure again, just go ahead and give us a go. So there we go. So we're returning, oh, excuse me, X. So we're returning A, the first letter of the word, right? So if you need to, double check that. So we can do the same thing here with Y, colon 1, right? Okay, so now we've got their initials. So all we need to do is print this out. Let's print out X. Now let me just show this, X plus Y. So that's going to print out their initials, AA. So we want to capitalize that. So now if I use the capitalize function, that's just going to take the first letter, remember. So remember we have upper. So this is a problem here. I'll just quickly show. So let's use upper. Now the problem with this is it's only going to be applied with the one letter. That's the N letter. So this is just being applied here on Y. So what we're going to need to do is wrap this in brackets here. So this is evaluated first and so resolved. So then we then perform the upper on both of these letters. So let's just give this a go. And there we go. So I do hope these challenges are challenging. If they're not, please let me know. And if you think of any challenges, then I will definitely update the GitHub repository with any challenges that you can think of that might be relevant or appropriate. If you're finding these particularly difficult, don't worry, just keep going. You'll continue learning more. Now, this may not start to kind of really feed in, or you may not start to get it, if you like, until you've done many more examples. And that's completely okay. For some people, it takes longer than others. If you have to, just keep going over the material. It can be difficult initially to get a grasp of if statements and how to set out the logic of applications. And it just, like I said, just happens over time, really, as well as a lot of practice, of course. Right, so here, let's do code challenge 4. Use the list shown below to count the number of instances the number 10 occurs. Calculate the combined total. So we need to identify where the integer 10 appears. Now this is 1010, not 10, so just 10. 1, 2, 3. So there's 4 instances of 10 in this list. So we need to count those, the fact that there's 4 of them, and then we need to calculate the combined total. So in this case, it's going to be 4 times 10. So the outcome here should just be 40. Right, so let's give this a go. So if you look at the code repository, I've provided you this list here. So what we need to do now is we need to count the amount of 10 instances in this list. So X count. Okay, so what do we want to count? We want to count the amount of 10s. Right, so let's just do that first. Let's print this out. So that should return 4. There we go. So there's 4 instances of 10. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember, this here is referring to an integer 1010 and not just 10. So there's 4 instances of 10. So we just need to add those all up. So there's 4 of those. times 10. That is then going to give us our number, I think. There we go, 40. So let's move on to challenge 5. Use the provided text to help format the text so that the space appears in the text after each full stop. So you can see in this text here, the mistake that seems to be a case on all the full stops. There's no space after the full stop. So what we need to do is essentially a find and replace here. So let's go ahead and try this. So again, you'll find the code in the repository. So you can go ahead and just copy in the text here. So this text is stored in this variable. You can see after the full stop, there's no space. So what we're going to need to do now is go ahead and get this data x and use replace. So let's use replace. So the first of all, the old, which is dot, that's what we want to find, and then we want to replace it with the new. Okay, so this is just going to be dot space. So let's just give that a go. Let's now print out x. So after the full stop, you can see it's not working. It actually hasn't worked because I'm printing out the wrong version. So y is now storing the correct version. You can now see I've got a space after the full stops. And then let's move on to the last code challenge, challenge 6. Right. So this is a little bit more tricky, and there's one step here that I've not shown you. I just want you to try and utilize your initiative, maybe do a little bit of searching online to try and find the solution to this. Right, so ask the user to type in their name. If their name matches a name in the provided list, let the user know. Okay, if their name does not match any names in the list, we need to capture the value error and print a suitable message. Right, okay, so we provided the list again. Again, that's in the code repository. I keep mentioning the code repository. There's a link in the description. If you haven't already found that, that should take you to the GitHub repository. Right, so where's our list? Right, so grab the list. Right, so we have 3 names here. So let's first of all take an input from the user. Please enter your name. Cool. Right, so that's that done. So now we need to make a match. Now remember, there's 2 options here. We have find and index, and find only works on strings, and here we're using a list. So therefore, we are going to use index. So let's use this try feature again. If you're not familiar again with this, just have a look in the examples that we've done previously. Again, it's in the code in the repository. So here then we're going to take x, use index to then search in this list for the user's input. So that's y. Okay. Right, so now here we're going to use except. Okay, so we're going to capture the value error if the user doesn't type in a username that appears here. So let's just say no match was found. There we go. So let's just give this a go. So please enter your name. Okay, no match was found. Right, so let's enter a name that does appear in our list. And you can see that at the moment we have nothing. So maybe you've got to this point in your example. So what can we do here? So here we've obviously, if we just think about this as an if else, if this is if, this happens when, for example, this is false, or in this case, this will happen when there's an error, right? So let's now add on an else here. So what this is saying here essentially is that if there's a problem, we're going to show no matches found. However, if there is a match, then we're now going to perform an action. So let's just print out a match was found, for example. Let's give that a go. Right, so now when we type in a match, we're now provided a string, a match was found. So we blasted through quite a lot of information there. And this is something that will just take practice. and continual practice. So by all means, maybe give yourself a few challenges every day. Just make sure you're just doing a few bits of coding every day, maybe just for 5 minutes. Just write out some code. Even if you're just copying the examples that I provided, you're just keeping it in memory. You're just trying to retain it, and it will help you retain this information, and ultimately it will help you improve your code. So I do hope you've enjoyed this session, string manipulation, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.